when we learn from our mistakes and we step forward in a place of financial custodianship and responsibility, and we don't repeat those mistakes, then everything's fine, right? We don't need to beat ourselves up about what we didn't know when we made decisions. We just don't repeat the same mistakes.
This is Leah Steele, aka The Wealth Witch, and this is my podcast. I'm here to activate you to remembrance of your divine birthright to be wealthy in all areas of your life. This podcast is for people ready to have controversial conversations about the financial control, manipulation, and tyranny that faces humanity today. I'm gonna live in freedom. I'm gonna live my destiny. I'm gonna live my freedom. I'm gonna live, the time is right now. The Wealth Witch. It's for the people who are ready to wake up, deconstruct their wealth programming, and free themselves from the financial slavery consciousness that serves the global financial agenda. I'm committed to realizing a new global wealth paradigm where economic freedom is the reality and where you get to design and live the life of your dreams. Now let's do the damn thing.
So I had a epic one-on-one call with one of the women in Wisdom Keeper, and she asked me some questions that kind of sparked. I was like, oh, this is a really great topic to talk about on the next transmission call. So I want to talk a little bit today about debt and personal responsibility versus business responsibility. So the question that she asked me was, for those of you, I'm sure all of you have heard my story around the addiction treatment businesses imploding, losing $3 million, ending up $1 million in debt, lost our house, lost a car, 3 hours away from being homeless. So I want to tell that story in a little bit more detail than I typically give, because I typically share it like that. And it's not a story that I focus on too much anymore because, though I know that people love a good underdog story, I think it's more important for me, always the more important part of the story is what I did after versus this rags to riches story or whatever. So, but I do want to talk about this because the question that was asked to me was a really, really good one. And I think it's, it's important to share this and to have this information and for you guys to kind of really understand where I came from and how I hold my, what my personal values are that enable me to live this life that I'm living right now. So, so the addiction treatment businesses, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background because I think you actually need to understand this to understand what happened. But the addiction treatment businesses were very successful. And the sober living home we had for 8 years. And then the outpatient program we had for about 4 years. And both were really, really successful. And addiction treatment was my family business. So it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I want to grow up and work in addiction treatment. It just was I was literally raised in treatment centers. My mom is a world-renowned addiction treatment therapist. And did consulting all over the world with treatment programs, helping them come in, kind of helping them identify the problems in their facilities and fix them. But from a very young age, I literally was always, I had a single mom who worked a lot. I was always in treatment centers. I was always around it. So I really just I feel like I absorbed and knew that business through osmosis because I was just in it all the time. So at 19, I moved to New York City and I lived in New York for 4.5 years. And I actually got a job, a really great job actually, as a VP of marketing for a new record label that was opening in California. And so, but there was a 6-month gap between when it was going to be opening. And I decided to go home for a few months. And then it just was super interesting, the timing of it all, because I went home and then, so I lived in New York City. I lived in Brooklyn actually. But I worked in New York City. I worked on a street called John Street, which it was like directly kitty corner the from the trade center. And I moved home like 1 week before the before September 11th happened. And I was coming home for like just a 6-month window. And then I was going to move to California. And the building actually that I worked in is no longer standing after all of that. It ended up having to be taken down. So that was like really crazy. But then what ended up happening is the woman that so I don't know if any of you remember the singer Aaliyah, but it was her record label, Black Ground Records, and they were opening an LA division of Black Ground Records, and she died in a plane crash. And so ultimately they didn't end up opening the LA office. And I was in Salt Lake City, like taking my little sabbatical. And my mom had opened a new treatment center in Salt Lake City called Cirque Lodge, which is like one of the top treatment centers in the world now. And I went to work there just because I was like, I needed a job, right? And I didn't know what I wanted to do for sure. And so I went to work there in business development and operations. And again, like I was working with my mom, and I was working with a man who was kind of like my second father, who my mom had given him his first job in treatment. And he was the director of operations for this treatment center. And I just was good at it. And so, I worked there for about 3.5 years. And then I decided that I wanted to pursue my singing career and move to LA. And so I moved to LA, but I still was working in the treatment industry because I was consulting. My mom and I had a consulting company. I was doing the contract part of it, and some administrative stuff and some operation stuff for some of the treatment centers as she was doing the evaluations of the programs. And so the whole time I was in New York or in LA pursuing my singing career, I was also doing consulting in addiction treatment. Ended up getting pregnant with Josiah. And I mean, that's a whole longer story for another time, but I was recording my demo, had just signed with a major Nashville manager, was getting ready to move to Nashville, and I got pregnant. And then I just like had these, I was like, oh, it's fine. I'm going to record my demo while I'm pregnant. And then as soon as I have the baby, like I'm going to, move down to Nashville and pursue my country music career and blah, 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 blah. And ultimately ended up having Josiah and deciding, like literally right upon having him, that I did not want to be a singer. I only wanted to be a mom. So that is my previous life there. But and so I moved back home to Salt Lake City, Utah, in January of 2016. And I kind of January of 2006, not 16, January of 2006. And I spent about 18 months just really being a mom, and was lucky that I had some really great child support at the time. So I was able to stay home with Josiah and be a mom, but I got bored like really, really quickly with that. And so I started just kind of like doing some consulting with my mom, and ultimately ended up getting involved in a sober living home that we ended up taking over. And then I found myself like fully immersed in working in addiction treatment full time. It was one of those things where I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to work for anyone else. I really only want to work for myself. And so my mom and I took over the sober living home, and it was very, very successful. And then ultimately we ended up opening an outpatient clinic. But the outpatient clinic was based around, like, we were doing a lot of drug testing, and outpatient therapy, but we were billing insurance. And so the insurance, at the time, insurance was paying very, very well for addiction treatment services. But what ended up happening is that we had a billing software error, and my billing company wasn't open and transparent with me about what was going on. They were trying to fix it. They weren't open with me. And so they kept being like, oh, it's going to remedy. And so meanwhile, I was like leveraging myself, signing loans with personal guarantees. I had a silent partner who had invested a significant amount of money into the business. Sean and I invested a significant amount of our money into the business. But what ended up happening is that we had about $3 million in accounts receivable that was coming in. And so I was leveraging that accounts receivable with personal loans. and business loans to bridge the gaps when the money wasn't coming in because the billing company kept telling me it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Well, ultimately there was a billing software error. It put us too far out from submission dates for the claims, and we ended up losing all of that accounts receivable. So we ended up losing $3 million in accounts receivable. And as a result of the bridge loans that I took and the really bad business advice that my business partner gave me, and a variety of other things, we ended up about $1 million in debt with vendors that we owed at the time that the business closed. It was like outstanding bills to vendors, payroll tax, business tax, and then these bridge loans that I had taken. So when the business, it was my first real big business failure. I'd been fired from jobs, and I had been, I'd certainly experienced failures, but not to this degree. And it was so devastating. And I took it all personally. I literally was like, I am a failure. I failed at this. And it was really difficult. And luckily, those of you, I know many of you know my good friend, Jason Cisneros, and I've done several live streams with you. And I know that some of you have now entered into his community and know him as well. But it's really, really lucky that, I knew him, I had met him. And something in me, this is, when just following intuition, right? I had my spiritual reawakening had started, probably I'd say 2011. And so at, this point, this was 2016. So I'd kind of been in it, and I had already started side coaching business, knew I was miserable in addiction treatment, didn't want to be in it. I feel like I manifested the implosion of my businesses, but by this point, I was following synchronicities and signs, and I'd only met Jason a couple of times. We weren't close. We weren't friends. Literally I don't know that he could have picked me out of a crowd of two before. I'm sure he could have, but we didn't know each other well. And so when I reached, but I just had this feeling. I was like, you need to reach out to Jason. You need to reach out to Jason. Jason was a person I knew that had been through I'd heard him speak. I had been to seminars of his, and he was a person that, had filed bankruptcy 3 times. And, at the time had 29 companies and was one of Tony Robbins' top peak performance coaches for 12 years. He's got a real depth of wisdom and knowledge. And there's just something in me that knew that I needed to reach out to him, that I knew I needed to talk to him. And so I did. And I, went into his office, and those of you that know me know that this is not me, but I literally went into his office and I broke down, and I was sobbing, crying, I'm such a failure. This is what happened. What do I do? I had no idea what to do. I was in such a mess. I had no idea what to do. And he was he let me cry for a minute. We've told this story a couple of times, so you can definitely find these interviews on the interwebs, but he let me cry for a minute. And then he was like, all right, so you're ready to do something about this? And I was like, yep. And he laid out a plan for me. But one of the things that he said to me that was so impactful, and it's really what I wanted to share with you today, is he was like, Leah, there's a difference between the very wealthy and the low and middle, poverty, people that live in poverty, lower class and middle class. There's a big difference. And that difference is that people that are born wealthy are taught how business works and how businesses are set up to protect the principles of that business. He's like, the middle to lower class are not taught that. And they're not taught that for a reason. They're not taught that because them assuming personal responsibility for their businesses is part of what upholds our financial institutions and organizations. The wealthy don't take that level of responsibility because they understand how businesses are set up and designed to protect the business owners. And so he looked at the structures of my business, and he was like, the thing that's really interesting here is that, and that's interesting with most people, most entrepreneurs who go into business for themselves and become self-employed, is that the businesses actually end up being set up appropriately in the beginning. But along the way, the business owner then starts to take personal responsibility for the business. Well, the truth about business is it has ebbs and flows. Some businesses are successful, some businesses aren't. Most businesses fail within the first 5 years. So if you've made it past, I mean, there's these benchmarks, right? It's 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. So if you've made it past these benchmarks and you're in business, it's like you've already succeeded, right? Because most fail. And if you've decided to even be in business and be an entrepreneur, I feel like you've already succeeded, because so many people won't do that are not cut out for it. Every single one of you that are in this container, like, you are the outliers. Most people aren't made for what you are out doing in the world. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of chutzpah. It takes a lot of it just takes a lot of courage to be out in the world, putting yourself out there and doing what you're doing. So obviously I commend all of you, but, and so he started to talk to me about this and really get me to understand. He was like, he broke down my business from the very beginning to the very end. He's like, first and foremost, you believed that this man who came in as a private investor in your company had your highest and best interest at heart. He didn't. He was like, in business, especially men always have their highest and best interest at heart. He invested not out of the goodness of his heart because he wanted to help you, which potentially he also wanted that. He invested first and foremost. He was a businessman who had $400,000 to invest in a business. First and foremost, he invested because he believed he was going to get a return on investment. And he set up your partnership agreement. And so this is the thing that I didn't know, right? Because we don't know what we don't know until we actually go out and experience things. He set up your partnership agreement. He's like, this is a horrible partnership agreement that completely took advantage of you. And you should have never signed this deal. And in representing to you that this was a good business deal, he's like, that alone, you should feel okay about walking away from the money that you owe him, because he took a risk. Every investment is a risk. Every investment into anything that you invest in is a risk. So, my business partner had asked me to sign a personal guarantee on the money that he gave. And not only so, and there was sweat equity on my part in the business. I made financial investment, but he put his money in as debt with a personal guarantee. It was a bad deal. It was a really, really bad deal. So he's like, first and foremost, he's like, you need to have a conversation with this man because this was a shitty deal and he knew it. Like, he's like, there's no way he was a businessman had you sign this deal. He took advantage of you from day one of this business. So there was, it was this education process that I went through with Jason that day in his office and continued to go through and still continue to go through with him. Honestly, like, he's incredible. And I'm going to actually reach out to him because I really love for him to come in and do a session in here for you guys and talk to you about some of this, because I think it's really powerful to hear it, from somebody else's perspective, especially somebody who's owned as many businesses as Jason has. So, ultimately he was just like, you have to stop taking personal responsibility for the failure of your business. Businesses fail and it doesn't make you a failure. And he's like, what was happening? And part of the reason why my business failed, honestly, and if I can impress anything upon you guys right now, part of the reason that my business failed was because I put everyone and everything first before me and my family. So that means I paid everyone first. I made sure my vendors were paid. I made sure my employees were paid before my family was taken care of. I was paying my bills and paying my rent on my business building before I was paying my mortgage and my rental payments. Like, my family was, eating, Sean and I were eating rice and beans to make sure that our employees were paid, like, at the worst moments of that business collapse. And, Jason looked at me and he said, you have to promise me, he's like, I will help you through this, but you have to promise me that you will never, ever put yourself and your family last, that you will always, always put yourself and your family first. So this is advice that I give every single one of you, especially, as you're starting to build your personal, businesses and you're starting to hire team and you're starting to, move more out of a solopreneurship into a business, that, this is a promise that I would want all of you to make to me as well. Like, learn from my mistakes, please. And I know that some of you have actually already been there that are in this container as well, because I've had conversations with you about it before, but, that's not how it works. You pay yourself first. You make sure that your family is always provided for and taken care of. So I made a promise to Jason that day in the office, and I have kept that promise. And that's been a really interesting promise to keep, because what it means is so this person, who I'm not going to out her, if she wants to say who it was that I had this conversation with, who's a wisdom keeper, that's fine. But she asked me, she was like, how did you set yourself up to pay off all of that debt? And I'm like, I didn't pay off all of that debt. That's the reality. I didn't. I've paid off a large portion of it, but there was debt that I walked away from because I wasn't actually financially liable for that debt. And there were places where I was taken advantage of that I walked away from debt. And then there was stuff that I actually paid, right? But the piece there for me was that the business was responsible for those expenditures and those debts. I was not personally responsible. And what happened was, because I, and we're all spiritual people here in these containers, right? We take personal responsibility for things that we don't need to take personal responsibility for. And the thing you really need to hear is, like, you are spiritual people, but you are also business people. And it is really, really important that you are able to switch those hats. I was like, oh my God, feeling so horrible for like every vendor that ended up with an outstanding balance when the business went under. But at the end of the day, they're vendors. They get to write that off on their taxes. And because I was personal friends with some of them, I just felt this incredible sense of, responsibility. And I was so upset, and it was killing me. Like, literally, I was getting so sick. Like, I couldn't be there for my family. I was an emotional wreck. And, these are all the things that he pointed out to me. And so, Sean and I sat down and we had some conversations, and we decided, like, who do we really feel personally responsible for and want to pay back? And who do we not need to pay back? And who are we going to pay back, but we're going to pay them back on our terms? And so this is one of the things that Jason really helped me with. And I think for those of you that maybe have a lot of debt and are dealing with debt, this was helpful. Like, Jason was like, Leah, you could literally walk away from all of this and file bankruptcy right now. But that wasn't what I wanted to do. And he was like, so you go to these people, your debtors, and most of them were personal debtors, and be like, look, this is how I'm going to repay you. These are my repayment terms. You can either take it or I'm going to file bankruptcy and walk away. And so as a result of that, I'm still actually paying off some of that debt. I pay it off on my terms. Now, like, where the balances are on that debt, could I write a check? Like, could I really, like, over the next 2 months, like, buckle down and write a big check to those people and pay it off? Absolutely. But it would put undue stress and strain on me and my family. And I'm not willing to do that, because the most important thing for me and my number one value is the health, safety, and security of me and my family. So that means I don't overextend myself paying debt back. And I take the time that I need to and want to take to pay that back from a business that failed, right? And this is custodianship. Like, this is actually stepping fully into custodianship of money, making sure that me and my family are taken care of first. Now, people can be like, oh, you live in luxury. Oh, you do this. Oh, whatever, and lots of people have lots of judgments about how I live my life and how I've chosen to pay back some of this debt. They get to have those judgments. At the end of the day, this is the life that I've decided that I want to live, that I desire to live, that keeps me fully energetically in a place where I can do the work that I'm meant to do in the world. And I still hold financial custodianship and pay back the debts that I have committed to paying back in the timeline that I've committed to paying it back. And so I felt like it was really important to share this with you guys so that you get to live life on your terms. Okay. And it's not, you really cannot be, this is the other thing that Jason like really, really imprinted into me. You can't beat yourself up for not knowing what you didn't know. So many of you that have incurred all this debt, it's like you were doing the best that you could at that time. And you felt like you wouldn't have made the decision to incur the debt if you didn't feel like that was what was in your highest and best. Now, hindsight's always 20/20. We can look back and be like, oh my God, I fucking wasted, I definitely can be like, oh, I wasted $100,000 on that mentor. That was ridiculous. I shouldn't have done that. But I did what I thought was best in the moment. So when we learn from our mistakes and we step forward in a place of financial custodianship and responsibility, and we don't repeat those mistakes, then everything's fine, right? We don't need to beat ourselves up about what we didn't know when we made decisions. We just don't repeat the same mistakes. And so, that entire process has been, is, and will continue to be a huge learning experience for me. But like, what I want you to take away from this, and really what I want you guys to work on this week, is to identify, what are your values? What are your highest values in your life and in your business? And really taking ownership of that, of those values, and putting those values first, 100% putting those values first. Short, sweet, to the point, but that's what I had to share with you today. Mwah. Love you guys.
That's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to connect with me on social media and reach out. I love hearing from you. And if you want more of me, real, raw, and uncensored, make sure to join the Wealth Witch Telegram channel. It's my free channel where I share all of my random daily musings, as well as the information that I feel like is important and pertinent to my community. We've put a link to the Telegram channel in the show notes, so make sure to come join us over there if that intrigues you. Remember, wealth is a mindset, and you are the most powerful creator in your reality. Until next time, this is the Wealth Witch signing off.
I'm gonna live the time.